call to order when you're ready after that.
Okay. Okay, now starting the April 8th, 2021 Mount Pleasant Planning Commission meeting. Mr. Kane, will you take roll?
Commissioner Daly.
Here.
And reminder, City.
Oh, yes, sorry. City, Mount Pleasant, Isabella County, State of Michigan.
Commissioner Friedrich.
Here, Mount Pleasant, Isabella County, Michigan.
Commissioner Honig.
I'm here in the city of Mount Pleasant, Isabella County, State of Michigan.
Commissioner Irwin.
I'm here, City of Mount Pleasant, Isabella County, State of Michigan.
Commissioner Kingsworthy is absent. Commissioner Kostreva is absent. Commissioner Leash.
Here, City of Mount Pleasant, Isabella County, Michigan.
Commissioner Ortman.
Here, Mount Pleasant, Michigan, Isabella County, State of Michigan.
And Commissioner Rise is absent. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
Move to approve.
Support.
Any discussion? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly.
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich.
Aye.
Commissioner Honig.
Aye.
Commissioner Irwin.
Aye.
Commissioner Leash.
Aye.
Commissioner Rise. Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Rise is absent. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of the March 4th, 2021 joint meeting with the City Commission minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly.
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich.
Aye.
Commissioner Honig.
Aye.
Commissioner Irwin.
Aye.
Commissioner Leash.
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman.
Aye.
Did I get everybody? So it was a little confusing tonight. Madam Chair, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of the March 4th, 2021 regular meeting minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly.
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich.
Aye.
Commissioner Honig.
Aye.
Commissioner Irwin.
Aye.
Commissioner Leash.
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. And next item on the agenda is zoning board of appeals report. Commissioner Friedrich.
Madam Chair, we did not meet last month.
Thank you. And next item on the agenda is communications. Mr. Kane.
Madam Chair, I did share with the Planning Commission one communication that was received yesterday from Mary Center regarding our work session this evening. There were no communications included in your packet this month, and we do not have any electronic communications tonight.
Thank you. And next item on the agenda is SUP 2105. Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our first application tonight is a request for a special use permit for a Class C adult use marijuana grower at 801 Industrial Drive. The subject property is zoned SDI industrial. No special requirements associated with that. The future land use is industrial. The current and prior use, the site does have manufacturing activity that currently takes place, and it would remain in place in a portion of the existing building. You will also recall that in January of this year, the Planning Commission approved a special use permit and site plan for a Class C medical marijuana grower at this location that is proposed to be co-located with the Class C adult use marijuana grower that is before you tonight for consideration. The applicant is Absolute Royal. The property owner is Common Investments LLC. The site is 6.13 acres. Just a quick overview of the location of this property and this request. The property is located on the corner of North Mission Road, north of the roundabout at the entrance to US 127 and Industrial Drive. It is located on the city limit of the city, so you'll note that the property zoning and land use to the immediate north of the property does reflect future land use and zoning in the Charter Township of Union. Surrounding land uses and zoning is primarily industrial in nature, with the exception of some vacant property, and immediately to the south, property that's zoned industrial with future land use of industrial that's used by CNU Global Campus. On the screen, you'll see a photograph of the site. This is viewed from Industrial Drive, looking toward the north and slightly to the west. So you see the main entrance to the facility where the offices are located. As I mentioned, the facility is currently used for manufacturing. The applicant has approval for a Class C medical marijuana grower, which would allow up to 15 medical marijuana plants to be grown. Tonight's request would add a Class C adult use grower license to the facility. Under the state's adult use grower definitions, a Class C adult use license allows a maximum of 2,000 plants. So this site would be licensed for 1,500 medical marijuana plants and 2,000 adult use marijuana plants under the proposed conditions. The next picture on your screen, you'll see this is taken from North Mission Road at Industrial Drive, looking towards the north and east. So this is the facade that faces towards North Mission Road, and you'll get a better sense for the size of the facility. It's roughly square with that office, blue office addition attached that was shown in the previous slide. The site overall, the existing building is just over 33,000 square feet. The grower section of the building, as proposed, totals 10,000 square feet of that building. There's no building additions or other site changes proposed beyond those that were submitted in January for approval in association with the medical marijuana grower. A copy of that approved site plan is included in your packet. The hours of operation proposed for this facility would be 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. As noted in the previous approval, the site has two separate parking areas, which total 92 vehicle parking spaces. There's also two loading areas, one on the east side of the building and one on the west. The applicant's approved site plan does include the required landscaping and bicycle parking that would be required for this use in this district. Adult use marijuana growers are regulated as a special use in the SCI district, and as such, they're subject to a variety of specific special use permit conditions for both adult use marijuana establishments as well as for growers specifically. Those are outlined in your packet and included on the slides before you. I would note that, as is common for these types of uses, staff's recommended conditions of approval include the applicant complying with all of these special use permit conditions. And we do have the applicant with us this evening to answer any questions that the Planning Commission might have. Staff's recommendation is to approve special use permit 2105 subject to the following conditions. 1, the applicant shall comply with all special use permit criteria for adult use marijuana establishments, as well as the specific criteria applying to growers. 2, the applicant shall comply with the approval requirements of SUP 2101 and SBR 2101. That's the January approval I referenced earlier for the medical marijuana Class C grower license. And 3, the applicant shall comply with the requirements of Public Works and Public Safety. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Any questions for Mr. Kane?
So is the rule you, in one part of the building, you grow medical marijuana, the other part of the building, you grow recreational marijuana? I'm assuming that's the same. And then you just have to process one in one direction and one in the other direction?
My understanding is that the way the state's tracking system, their metric system works, is that each plant is tagged. And so you can commingle adult use and medical marijuana plants within a facility, but those plants would remain on their specific supply chain tracks from growing to processing to the retail side. From basically seed to sale, they would stay in that track, but they can be commingled within a common growing space.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Kane? Okay, if the applicant would like to speak.
Who's the applicant?
At this time, we don't have any further comments. If anyone has any questions for us, I guess please let us know.
If you could give us your name and address just for the record.
Austin Hollenbeck, 801 Industrial Drive, Mount Pleasant, Michigan.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant?
No, I guess the processing question got answered. I mean, my question, so I'm fine.
Hearing no questions, I will open up public comment if anyone from the public would like to comment.
Madam Chair, I would just know we do not have any electronic comments submitted at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. I'll close public comment and open up discussion.
Move to approve SUP 2105, subject to the following conditions. 1, the applicant shall comply with all special use permit criteria for adult use marijuana establishments, as well as the specific criteria applying to growers. 2, the applicant shall comply with the approval requirements of SUP 2101 and SPR 2101. And 3, the applicant shall comply with the requirements of Public Works and Public Safety.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly,
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich,
Aye.
Commissioner Honig,
Aye.
Commissioner Irwin,
Aye.
Commissioner Leach,
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 6-0.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Next item on the agenda is SUP 2106 and SPR 2105. Mr. Kane?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our final public hearing tonight is a request for a adult use marijuana micro business at 1014 Industrial Drive. The subject property is zoned SCI Industrial with no special requirements associated. It has a future land use of industrial. The applicant is proposing to construct a new building which will house an adult use marijuana micro business. The property is currently vacant and owned by the City of Mount Pleasant Economic Development Corporation. This is property that contains a portion of which contains a stormwater facility for the Industrial Park North district. The Economic Development Corporation does have a contract with the applicant to sell a portion of the property that is not used nor necessary for stormwater retention for this project. The applicant is ATC Central Incorporated, and the proposed site area after division and sale would be 2.45 acres. Before we move into the case, I just wanted to briefly provide an overview of a marijuana micro business, since this is the first time that the Planning Commission has considered an application for special use permit for a micro business. Micro businesses are one of the establishment types that exist only under the state's adult use marijuana regulations. The medical marijuana law contains 5 facility types that may be permitted, and the City of Mount Pleasant does permit all, or I should say each of those 5 facility types, which are provisioning centers, processors, growers, safety compliance facilities, and secure transporters. The adult use marijuana law includes all of those facility types, as well as some unique facility types that only exist in the adult use marijuana law, and micro businesses is one of those. A micro business is very unique. It essentially is a combination of a marijuana, adult use marijuana retailer, processor, and grower. And the idea here is that a small business, it's micro business in the sense that rather than having multiple outlets across the state, a micro business licensee can have one micro business in the state of Michigan. And within that micro business, they can grow up to 150 adult use marijuana plants they can process those plants, and they can in turn sell the product that results from that processing to the public. They cannot sell or process any marijuana that is not grown within the microbusiness facility. So this is really a vertically integrated business within one building at one location in the state. And so in that way, very different from some of the activity that's seen in some of the other licensing types. The property, as I mentioned, is located in the city's industrial park north. It's uniquely situated. I don't know that we've ever run into this situation before where properties in the immediate vicinity don't have zoning because it happens to be located where the northbound entrance and southbound exit ramps from US 127 intersect with the interstate. And so for a significant distance to the east and to the south, the adjacent properties are owned by MDOT and don't carry a zoning or future land use designation. Immediately to the south and west of the proposed location would remain a separate parcel of land that would contain the city's stormwater facility, which you can make out in the aerial image. It runs sort of linearly along the southbound exit ramp from US 127. To the west, on the other side of the street, is a commercial vehicle tire repair facility. All the properties that do carry a future land use designation do have a future land use of industrial. Everything that has a zoning designation is zoned SDI industrial, as is the subject property itself. On the screen, you'll see a perspective of the property. This is looking toward the north from Industrial Drive into the vacant lot. Sort of to the right and rear in this image is where the retention facility is located for stormwater. And in the far distance, you can make out where the elevation's a bit higher. That is that southbound exit ramp from US 127. And so the applicant's proposing to purchase the northeast portion of the Economic Development Corporation owned site to build their microbusiness on. This perspective is looking from Industrial Drive towards the south and west. And so just another perspective, the Interstate Off Ramp would be located on the left side of the screen, sort of where more of the vegetative growth is located. As you look towards the right, if you travel down Industrial Drive further, you would eventually end out at North Mission Road, close to our previous case. This is just on the street from our last public hearing this evening. Microbusinesses, like other marijuana establishment types, are regulated as special uses in the SDI zoning district. Microbusinesses are only permitted in the SDI zoning district, and they are subject to several special use permit conditions. Some of these are generalized to all adult use marijuana establishments, and then microbusinesses themselves have their own specific requirements that go along with them. They're largely consistent with the specific criteria that would apply to retailers, processors, and growers, since the microbusiness contains the same type of activities that you would see in those three distinct establishment types. On the screen, you'll see an overview of the site plan, and in general, the applicant's proposed building is located in the center of the newly divided parcel. The applicant's proposing to install a customer parking lot. It would be on the south and west side of the building. And to the north and east, the applicant's proposing a loading and unloading area with a small amount of parking for employees. The applicant does not anticipate having more than a handful of employees at any given time working within the facility. In your packet, we provided a floor plan of the proposed layout so you can get a sense of the distinct areas within the facility that will be used for each purpose, growing, processing, and ultimately selling the marijuana products to the public within the facility. Just running through the site plan for the property, the site plan is consistent with the requirements of the zoning ordinance for site plan applications. The applicant is proposing to construct a new building. However, within the SDI zoning district, setbacks are not regulated. For your information, I've provided the setbacks from the front, south side, and rear. Due to the configuration of this lot, it actually ends in it's triangular in shape. So there is not a side north setback due to that configuration. In terms of building standards, the only building standard within the SDI district is building height. which is a maximum of 75 feet. The applicant's proposed building would be at a height of 16 feet. In terms of parking, as I mentioned, the applicant's proposing 2 separate parking areas with a total of 12 vehicle parking spaces. I will note that the applicant is proposing to install a gravel parking area in both cases with asphalt driveway approaches from Industrial Drive into the parking area, and then concrete walks at the building from the parking area to provide access to the building. Gravel parking is permitted in the SCI zoning district by right as a option for a surface material. The applicant's also proposing to provide 4 bicycle parking spaces. That's consistent with the minimum quantity required for a marijuana establishment. We do not yet have a specification for the proposed bicycle parking, and we'll need that provided, and it's included in staff's condition of approval this evening. In terms of other requirements, we don't yet have detailed information on the applicant's plan for solid waste or on the placement of mechanical equipment. You'll recall typically most buildings will have some level of mechanical equipment. Marijuana facilities that include marijuana growing often will have additional HVAC equipment to address filtration needs within the facility. And so we'll be looking for that as a condition of approval as well to ensure that it's properly placed and screened. The applicant's proposing to provide 11 trees within the front lawn, which is consistent with the requirements of the district. The applicant is also proposing to screen the parking area from the public right-of-way with an evergreen hedge, which is consistent with the zoning district. And as I mentioned, we'll just need information depending on the placement of the solid waste and mechanical equipment to ensure that those items are screened as required in that district. The applicant has provided specifications for the building mounted lighting that's proposed, and those light fixtures do conform with the requirements of Chapter 96 nuisances, which contains the city's lighting standards. So with that, staff's recommendation this evening is approval of the special use permit and site plan review subject to the following conditions. 1, the applicant shall comply with all special use permit criteria for adult use establishments, as well as the specific criteria applying to micro businesses. 2, the applicant shall provide a solid waste plan consistent with the requirements of the SDI zoning district. 3, the applicant shall provide a specification for the proposed bicycle parking, solid waste, and mechanical placement and screening consistent with the requirements of the SDI zoning district. 4, the applicant shall split the subject property prior to receiving a certificate of occupancy. And 5, the applicant shall comply with the requirements of public works and public safety. I will note that subsequent to the preparation of this packet, we have been working with the applicant on that lot split and finalizing that. And so that is in the works and obviously would be taking place in conjunction with the applicant's purchase process in obtaining this property from the city's economic development corporation. I did note earlier that Tim Beebe, representing the applicant, is on tonight's meeting call. I don't know that the applicant himself is on the call, so I would imagine Mr. Beebe will be fielding any questions the Planning Commission might have this evening. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Any questions for Mr. Kane?
I have one. I just wanted to clarify. So with this being a micro business, this would be a separate of like how we have the business or grower licenses, like we've had 3 for the adult use, like, you know, for each of those. So this would be under a different count of like for micro business of how many we would approve.
Fantastic question. And thank you for asking it. The adult use marijuana ordinance at the city level limits the number of micro businesses to 2. And so this would count against that total of 2 that are able to be licensed by the city.
Do I have it correctly that the only marijuana that this business can sell is the stuff it grows?
That's correct. Yeah, marijuana micro business can only process what it grows, and it can only sell what it processes and grows.
Any other questions for Mr. Kane? If Mr. Beebe would like to speak on behalf of the applicant.
I only had one thing to add after Jacob's review. Jacob, could you pull up sheet 3 of the site plan submittal?
Yes, just give me one moment.
Yep.
As in 3 of 6?
Yes, sir.
Is this what you were expecting, Tim?
If you can zoom up close into towards the building, backside of the building. Okay. If you'll note where the employee parking is, there's 4 spaces back there, and then there's a striped off area. And then there's a little box inside that striped. I don't know if you're looking at 8.5 by 11 sheets in your packet, it's going to be almost impossible to see. But if you see where it says down shielded wall packs and the S and the H, that is actually a small fenced in area for rollaway trash. And we put it in that area and did not get the parking spaces close to it, so you'd have access to get into it, and then you'd roll them out to the curb. He's not proposing to have a dumpster, but there's room in that area for 4 of the small rollaways. And that's how he's proposing for waste receptacles. That would be fenced and gated. And then on the back side of the building, if we start at the most northerly corner of the building, it says 12.5 feet down. That area, and also the similar one on the other end of the building, that 20-foot area, those are 2 fenced-in areas for mechanical. At this point, he did not have the mechanical design done. We looked at what potentially was going to have to go in there and set sizes for that area. I think that's very conservative, but some of the air handling needs to have enough room, especially if you're going to fence around it. So those 2 areas are being proposed for the mechanical. At this point, I don't have a mechanical plan for you to look at, but I'll provide Jacob details on the fencing for the mechanical and also for the dumpsters, so that he has that, and the bike rack.
So what do you put in the 20 feet between the dumpsters and the mechanical?
The 20 feet between the dumpsters and the mechanical.
Well, I see the 12.5, then I see a 20, and then I see a down shield wall pack.
Yep. And then the next is a concrete pad.
Yeah.
Or an access door. That is for deliveries. And then you'll have another green space, which will just be lawn area.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll go into the fenced in area for mechanical again. And there's going to be air handling units for each side. If you look at the floor plan, there's the growing areas are separated. And so you'll need air handling units on each end.
Okay.
But I'll get the specific details on fencing height, fencing type.
Did we lose Tim?
I don't know.
I think we did. So
Does that mean we lost our quorum?
No,
we lost our applicant.
Oh, Tim Beebe.
Yeah.
I guess we can start the public hearing then, since we don't have time to ask questions of.
Madam Chair, I could kill a moment. Commissioner Kingsworthy, since you joined us, could I just get your city, county, and state for the record?
Yes, I'm in the city of Mount Pleasant and the county of Isabella and the state of Michigan.
Thank you. Guess it wasn't enough time, but I'll turn things back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll open up the public hearing if there's anyone from the public that would like to comment.
Madam Chair, we don't have any electronic communications at this time.
Okay, I'll close the public hearing or the public comment portion of the hearing. And seeing as Mr. Beebe has not returned, I will open up discussion.
Jacob, you said that the city is going to allow 2 of these micro businesses?
Correct. That's the current cap within the ordinance.
Is this the only applicant to have a micro business so far? Like to want one?
We've had some inquiries over the past couple years, but nothing that has progressed beyond that stage.
I think it's only a matter of time.
I will say from what I understand, because of the need to follow procedures for growing, processing, and sales, all of which have their own complicated regulatory requirements at the state level. This is a complicated business proposition. It does take a unique individual to take that on because it is burdensome in a way that is unique, and particularly given the size of the business and the requirement to be single location within the state. I think that discouraged some folks who had expressed interest in the concept before the law was adopted from jumping in.
Now that Mr. Beebe's back, did you have anything further you wanted to say?
No, that was it. I just wanted to point out where those locations were going to be, but the details I'll have to get into Jacob.
Thank you. Anyone have any other questions for Mr. Beebe? Hearing none, we'll go back to discussion.
And move to approve SUP 2106 and SPR 2105, subject to the following conditions. 1, the applicant shall comply with all special use permit criteria for adult use establishments, as well as the specific criteria applying to micro businesses. 2, the applicant shall provide a solid waste plan consistent with the requirements of the SDI zoning district. 3, the applicant shall provide a specification for the proposed bicycle parking, solid waste, mechanical placement, and screening consistent with the requirements for the SDI zoning district. 4, the applicant shall split the subject property prior to receiving a certificate of occupancy. And 5, the applicant shall comply with the requirements of public works and public safety.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly,
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich,
Aye.
Commissioner Koenig,
Aye.
Commissioner Irwin,
Aye.
Commissioner Kingsworthy,
Aye.
Commissioner Leash,
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. And next item on the agenda is public comment. This is the public's last opportunity to make any comment about whatever topic it is they want to talk about. So if anyone from the public would like to speak.
I'm sure I'll just note that we don't have any electronic communications at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. And I will close public comment. And next item on the agenda is new business, the work session schedule, Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Back in February, the Planning Commission held a work session to talk about prioritization of housekeeping amendments. And subsequently, we had some additional discussion of that during the joint meeting in March. I had indicated in February that I would come back to you with a overview of what I heard from you in February in terms of prioritization of items for future discussion and work session with a draft schedule. Just basically wanted to share this with you for your information, and certainly would welcome any feedback if I got anything incorrect in terms of your expectations for the scheduling. I threw the caveat in the memo, but I would just let you know this is obviously subject to adjustment, but this is at least a starting point for tackling these issues moving forward through the year, and just as strictly as an FYI.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Anyone have any questions?
Looks like a list.
Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda, staff report, Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next month, we will have our annual presentation on the proposed capital improvement plan. This will be for 2022 to 2027. And I would anticipate that Assistant Finance Director Chris Saladin will join us as usual to provide a brief presentation and answer any questions the Planning Commission might have. It is likely that proposed draft plan will arrive on the city's website before your packet arrives to you. So if you're interested in getting a head start on looking at that, I'd encourage you to keep an eye on the city update section of the city homepage for that link. Right now, you'll find the 2021 to 2026 plan is there. So that would not be the one to invest your energy in reviewing. We also, I'm expecting at least one special use permit and site plan review for a project on South Main Street for an existing registered student organization dwelling. I'll be meeting with the applicant tomorrow to hopefully get that application buttoned up. Our deadline date is Monday of next week. So at this point, that's the primary application I'm anticipating for May. And then, of course, hopefully we will have time to adjourn to work session next month to discuss green infrastructure as well as draft updated bylaws document. That's all I have tonight, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. If anyone would like to move to adjourn to the work session.
So moved.
Second.
Do we need a roll call vote or no?
Good, yeah.
Okay.
Commissioner Daly,
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich,
Aye.
Commissioner Honig,
Aye.
Commissioner Irwin,
Aye.
Commissioner Leash, Commissioner Kingsworthy,
Aye.
Commissioner Leash,
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman.
Aye.
Madam Chair, we're going to work session.
Thank you. Does anyone need a break before we start the work session?
Gotta get some water.
Okay.
D. Yeah, there's one D. That's $1,000. You plus you have 1,200.
Sadly. No.
Okay, let's start the work session, Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You'll recall in February when we discussed housekeeping amendment items, one of the items that received the most interest was discussing missing middle housing. And at that time, particularly two possible topics for discussion. One was reviewing the existing principal residence exemption requirements for two-family dwellings and accessory dwellings in the CD3L and CD3 district. You'll recall that those were new requirements that were added in 2018 in association with the adoption of the current zoning ordinance. And then two, considering permitting additional housing types in the CD3L and CD3 districts. I think my memo was fairly self-explanatory, at least I would hope so, but just very quickly, I would just remind everyone that missing middle housing refers to type of housing unit, not price of housing unit. That's something that seems to get confused very frequently when this is discussed in general. So missing middle housing has to do with the format. So single family houses are not missing middle housing. Apartment complexes are not missing middle housing. Missing middle housing is the type of things that kind of fall in between those two areas, from a duplex or an accessory dwelling unit up to a small apartment building. By way of an example of a small apartment building that might fall in that missing middle definition, I would point to the brick apartment building that's located at the corner of West Campus Drive and Preston Streets as an example of a missing middle type housing apartment building. I would also point to an apartment building that's located on Eastwood Drive, just north of Preston Street. It's two examples that happen to be close to Preston Street, but there's a small apartment building that backs to what was once an office building on South Mission Street. Those are both the type of format that would fall kind of at the top end of the missing middle spectrum. And then again, the bottom end of the missing middle spectrum is really when you start talking about like a granny flat, accessory apartment, garage apartment type situation. These are generally housing types that existed in cities and neighborhoods pretty prevalently in the years before World War II, and then after World War II tended to become illegal to construct or build. And this is true across the country, and this is true in Mount Pleasant. So just looking through the regulatory history of the city, beginning with the city's 1961 zoning ordinance, and then moving into the 1971 zoning ordinance, and then the 1984 zoning ordinance, which is the ordinance that was replaced by the city in 2018. Each of those ordinances took steps towards prohibiting missing middle housing, either by directly through prohibition. So accessory dwelling units were explicitly prohibited in 1971, or through the specific requirements imposed within the code. So by separating out mixed use or multifamily districts from single family districts explicitly, or by mandating excessive parking or setback requirements for multiple family development, limiting or providing high land area requirements associated with multifamily housing. Those requirements essentially resulted in the type of development pattern that the city saw in the intervening years, which was principally apartment complex style, multiple family housing, and single or two family housing in our neighborhoods. So I put together some suggested discussion items for the evening. One having to do with the first question about that special use permit requirement for accessory dwellings and two family dwellings. And then two, and a little bit more complicated, is the discussion of missing middle housing types. My hope is that at the end of tonight's conversation, I'll have sufficient direction to begin working on a draft ordinance or ordinances that might address the Planning Commission's interest in reviewing this. Certainly, item one should be a simpler item to address. Item two may be more complicated and might require some more time to bring, and may actually require additional conversation at a future work session to get all of those items pinned down. But that's essentially my overview, Madam Chair, and I would entertain discussion and questions from the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Any discussion?
I really need an explanation of what number one is about.
So when the city adopted the new zoning ordinance in 2018, initially, you'll recall the initial draft of the ordinance prohibited two-family dwellings and accessory dwellings in the CD3L and CD3 zoning districts. This was as a result of some public input that had occurred both during the development of the ordinance, but also in the years immediately preceding its development. Concerns about two-family dwellings, particularly within neighborhoods. You will likely recall there was some conversation about that particular requirement in subsequent public hearings for the ordinance. And ultimately, the city commission elected to impose a principal residence exception requirement for new two-family dwellings and adult or accessory dwelling units in those two zoning districts, which essentially means that either the accessory dwelling or the principal dwelling in the case of accessory dwelling units, or one of the two units within a two-family dwelling in those districts would have to have a principal residence exception, which means there'd have to be an owner occupant on site. And so that requirement, I will say, presents some challenges. We have it's not a majority of the stock of existing two-family dwellings and accessory dwellings within the city, but a significant portion of those do have a principal residence exemption. That's not an unusual circumstance. However, mandating that as a requirement does create some financing challenges for new construction, because it can make lenders a little leery. Because essentially the way the ordinance is currently written, if you were to construct a new duplex or a new accessory dwelling and you were unable to maintain that principal residence exemption, your only option would be to leave one of the two units vacant, or to use one of the two units as part of the main unit under a single family occupancy. And so I'm recommending that the Planning Commission evaluate that. We're now 3 years plus out from the adoption of that standard to see if that is still the course of action that the Planning Commission wishes to utilize. I would suggest that in terms of missing middle housing types that would be a good fit in residential districts, those would be the two that would be the least impactful, and I think the most logical fit, because they already exist very widely within those districts. It just happens that those are existing, in some cases, non-conforming units within those districts.
So this owner occupied duplex requirement actually created by the city commission in response to their initially being like a prohibition from any new duplexes, if I'm remembering correctly? Wasn't that some sort of, yeah, so I was never necessarily a big proponent of requiring duplexes to have someone that owns it live there. I don't know about anyone else. But I know it was like a solution to the no duplex provision, and probably not the best solution.
Well, I know there was some discussion in our neighborhood over here about just a concern that if we didn't have that developers would, just buy up lots or buildings, split them into two and put students in them, or add an accessory building to every building they already have to get more students in those. So I think having this the way it is right now kind of brings that fear down of that happening. I'm not sure that would happen, but it's kind of the thinking that we've heard around here a little bit anyway.
How would an accessory building turn a building into a duplex? Wouldn't that be a separate building?
Well, if you're renting out a single family home and now you can put an accessory building on the back, couldn't you also rent that out?
Yes. So to Commissioner Friedrich's point, you could have family occupancy in each of the units. So the code draws a distinction between accessory dwellings and two-family dwellings on the basis of the relationship between the unit sizes. So two-family dwellings, the assumption is that the units are more or less the same in size or similar. It puts the range of, within 10% of the same either direction. An accessory dwelling would be on the more extreme end of that. So an accessory dwelling would be something that the principal home is much larger than the accessory unit. So typical to the backyard cottage, the over the garage apartment, the mother-in-law suite that's attached to the house. Those are typically less than 40% the size of the principal dwelling. But the occupancy situation on the property itself would be identical to a two-family situation. Each unit could be occupied by up to 2 unrelated people or by a group of people that meet the definition of family under the code.
So that would make it unlikely that a large group of students could live in such a dwelling, right?
Because the rule is still no more than 2 unrelated people in a unit.
Correct.
But for the property, it would be 4 if it's 2 buildings, correct?
Well, yeah.
Be 2, yes, it could be up to 4 people, unrelated people living on the lot, but only 2 per unit, which would be the same as a duplex that exists in a CD3L or CD3 district today.
Yeah.
And I will also note that both of these items currently are regulated as a special use, so they only exist at the discretion of the planning commission with a review for their contextual appropriateness, as well as an opportunity to impose conditions if it's felt that the proposal could be approvable if changes were made or if certain operational requirements were met in order to satisfy your concerns about a particular suggestion. There was a time in the distant past where the city allowed 2-family dwellings by right in our former R districts. So it's, and that's when I say distant past, that was, I believe, changed in 2000, that the city made 2-family dwellings special uses. Prior to that point, 2-family dwellings had been allowed by right citywide within our residential districts. So I'm not personally wouldn't suggest out of the gate changing the special use status, but I do think that the existing principal residence exemption requirement has the effect of almost becoming a prohibition on the uses within the district because of the difficulty of meeting that standard. It results in there being little to no opportunity for the creation of these types of units. And these units can offer a lot of benefits to the community, in terms of additional income for a homeowner, in terms of opportunities for reducing some of the homogeneity and segregation within our neighborhoods. I think we can all agree that there is not a uniform distribution of income or any other criteria across our city. And this is the type of thing, or age even. This creates new opportunities for housing for folks who may have a different income level or a different family status than is the majority within the neighborhood currently.
So I guess like the occupancy thing doesn't really equivalate to me for how it would be. Like how Corey was saying that, in the discussion, it was to kind of regulate how many would be converted over to instant mass student housing. That, if we are looking at that, it's a existing house, they would still need to come before us before they split it and get a special use permit for how they're gonna split it for, right?
Correct.
Even
And
if it wasn't owner occupied, right?
correct. And I think there's, probably some lingering history from the old days, especially in the lead up to the 1984 zoning ordinance taking effect, where homes were kind of bought in a rush and some very, in certain circumstances, some haphazard conversions took place.
You're being kind.
But
You're being kind.
well, trying to be delicate with how I describe it, but the net effect is that there were some the standards of the ordinance for these conversions do provide some assurance that there be appropriate space allocated for the extra unit within a space. This isn't, for instance, basement square footage can't be counted toward a 2-family dwelling. So this isn't just a matter of somebody turning their finished basement into an extra unit. There would have to be some major construction to separate the units. They do have to be completely separate, standalone, and not have any internal interior access to each other or any shared interior space. So the code does require that they become separate. There's also an opportunity if there are concerns that might not be met for the planning commission to add to the special use permit standards if it was felt that some additional requirements would provide the opportunity for the planning commission to make sure these are a good fit. One thing I might suggest would be just kind of a broader standard about architectural compatibility with the neighborhood. The city's had standards like that in the past when we had some flexibility for office uses in certain areas that were more residential in character, to ensure that, if an office building were built, that it would be compatible and it would look less like an office building and a little bit more like a home. And I think you can kind of see the outcome of that in certain places around town where those, dental offices and things of that nature are in those areas, where they do on a scale measure fit with the surrounding area. So if the planning commission felt like they wanted some additional architectural certainty or other standards implemented in association with reducing or eliminating that requirement for principal residence exemption, that might be an appropriate consideration.
Our project here it just strikes me as complicated because of the likelihood or the possibility that we're just opening up a new type of student housing in the midst. Because what we sort of were looking at is places for young professionals or people just starting out, or so they didn't have too busy paying student loans to work up a down payment, and and in some ways to invigorate the place with these young professionals that are entrepreneurial and et cetera. And I'm just mentioning that it's a complication because one of the things you go to is, okay, everybody's going to whack their house in two. And I'm concerned about the special use thing. I don't know that it works. I mean, there was a time when we were labeled as guilty of the worst affront to democracy as has ever been known in this country. Okay, up until January 6th. But so how much special use power do we have really?
Well, the Planning Commission's charge in an instance where it feels that a use may not fit in a district where it's permitted by special use is to go through a discussion of why that is, and to discuss if there's any potential remedy through conditioning of the approval that would address those concerns. And if it's determined by the Planning Commission that there is not a remedy to those concerns that would address, could be addressed through conditions of approval, at that point, following that discussion, it would be appropriate for a Planning Commission to consider a denial. So it's not a matter of the Planning Commission can't deny something. I think it's just a matter of when the Planning Commission reaches the decision to deny, it has to be on the basis of a statement of facts within the minutes of the meeting. And I do think there's probably some circumstantial situations where it's harder to reach that conclusion. So if we were dealing with, let's say, a proposal for, I'm not going to give a specific example. Let's say the use that's proposed is a special use. There are 5 other uses like it in the immediate vicinity. It's going to be a harder hill to climb to say it doesn't fit.
Right.
But in the case of a place where maybe the use doesn't exist anywhere in the vicinity, and maybe the uses in that area are really low intensity and the special use is a little bit higher intensity, it'd probably be a little bit easier to explain and articulate your rationale for why it can't fit. So it's really just a matter of when we've veered from that path in the past, it was largely problematic, not because it wasn't a reasonable possible outcome, but because of the manner it was reached, because there wasn't sufficient record to back up the decision. So
there's no way to say we allow one of these every 5,000 feet.
We have regulations like that based on distance. If the objective is to limit concentration, certainly that's something the Planning Commission could consider. I would suggest that in our current housing market, we're unlikely to see a flood of applications for these purposes. And if at some point the Planning Commission becomes uncomfortable with what they're seeing, the regulations can be amended, either I apologize, the sensor in our building is not very sensitive, so keeps turning my light out. The regulations could be reverted back to what they currently are, or they could be changed in another way to get a satisfactory outcome. That doesn't happen overnight, but it would provide the planning commission with an opportunity to certainly reevaluate it any time in the future.
But once we've already made the decision, we can't go back on things we've already done. So the damage is already done.
Well, if you've approved a special use permit for a property, the planning commission can initiate a revocation, but you would need a rationale for doing so specific to that property.
Yeah. So I think what we have right now probably isn't ideal, but can you think of a better way that's more of a hard and fast rule rather than it being open to a subjective opinion on the part of the planning commission to deal with I think that the reason we have it the way it is now is just because we were trying to limit rentals getting out of hand. Can you think of another way to do it that's a little easier?
Is there any sense that certain of these types of housings here are more or less conducive to what we're talking about? In other words, are people who are wanting to build student housing going to avoid the townhomes? Are they going to focus on the courtyard? I'm just wondering if your question here, 2A, what types of housing would you be interested in permitting? Maybe is that what we're talking about? Is that direction we can go, is to identify those?
I think we're wrapping up question number 1 right now.
Oh, I apologize.
The 2-family and accessory units.
All right.
No, you're fine. Commissioner Friedrich, I don't have a answer to that question yet. I would have to think about this a little bit more. I don't think there's an easy answer to that.
There may not be an answer at all, but I know that especially here in the Swan neighborhood, being so close to the university geographically, I know that some residents are concerned that the residential area really close to campus would become a magnet for stuff like this, once the current owners, sell the property or move on. So I know that's a concern in the Swan area anyway.
Sure.
Well, when I look at this picture of missing middle, I'm thinking, yeah, we're going to miss most of that middle as far as I'm concerned, because that's pretty scary stuff on the right-hand side. So I'm, whatever we're talking about is stuff on the far left of the missing middle. I agree that the public is going to have the predictable concern, or some of the public.
Yeah.
Could we, I mean, we have the master plan and we had kind of like area, we had areas that we were looking to focus some of that middle housing growth, right? It was more looking at concentrated close to like the Broadway, downtown area there. And, if we were to look at that as kind of, okay, if there's proposals in those areas, we could say that would meet a criteria more than something in the middle of a residential neighborhood, just because it's closer to campus. I think to me, that seems like we have this, vision that we worked hard on putting together that would really guide us of where we could justify approval and not.
Can I ask a question, Jacob?
Absolutely.
Did the city already decide that they didn't want any of this type of housing in those districts? Weren't they made non-conforming by the new code?
No, most of the housing that we would talk about that's non-conforming rooming style occupancy, which is, depending on the format, could be a single unit building often, could be a 2-unit, 3-unit, 4-unit, but it's more than 2 unrelated people in a unit. That's the type of housing that predominantly is non-conforming, and areas north of campus, if that's what you're referring to.
So we're just talking about eliminating the requirement that the person that owns a duplex also lives in a duplex, and that's it?
Well, that's for question one. That's the question.
How many owner occupied duplexes are there currently?
Get you a specific number. I want to say it's somewhere in the order of a third of the duplexes in the community have a principal residence exemption.
Talking about like 4 or 12 or?
Oh no, I mean we have hundreds of duplexes, so.
Okay.
No, I mean like I said, it's approximately, I want to say 1/3 of them.
That could be 100.
Yes.
I had a number in the. This was as of the end of June of 2019. There were 365 duplexes in the city, and so 710 duplex units, and of those, 92 had a principal residence exemption, 13%, 33%.
Okay, but how many are in the CD-3L and the CD-3?
Duplexes, see, there were 72 duplex units in the CD3L, 474 duplex units in the CD3.
Okay.
And then there are 164 in our CD4 and 5 districts combined.
Okay, so this is a significant number of buildings. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, our third most common housing type in the city is duplex. We have the multi-unit complexes, apartment complexes, at over 3,500 units, 3,300 single-family housing units, and we have 710 duplex units. And then
if we have a neighborhood that's half single family housing and half duplex, no matter what happens, you're going to have 50% of the people unhappy.
well, that's the question. There are, I mean, the zoning world is moving toward, or I should say moving away from single family zoning pretty quickly across the country. And the city of Mount Pleasant has always been a little bit more permissive of other housing types in residential districts than I would say is probably typical historically. And I'm not passing judgment one way or the other on that. I will just say when I arrived, I was surprised that the city didn't have any residential districts that were only single family, because that is and was very common. So that's I think just some contextual information about why those numbers are so high for existing units. Commissioner Irwin, you kind of indicated about the spread of these. I will say that on a neighborhood basis, the neighborhoods that have the largest number of duplexes currently would be the neighborhood north of campus and south of downtown, between Mission and the railroad, and then the west side neighborhood, so north of High, west of the railroad, and then the remaining portions of the city are all fairly comparable at around 50 or less duplex units.
Sure, but I mean, like the west side neighborhoods, it's not really a huge abundance of keggers going on there, right? I mean, we're primarily concerned with the area between downtown and the campus line.
I don't think that probably duplexes are the primary source of keggers in the city in any neighborhood. I think the rooming units are a contributing factor to some of the more problematic atmospheric conditions that take place in non-COVID years in Mount Pleasant.
Okay. Well, the way I'm looking at it is there's really not a solution here. If if a person buys a house in a college neighborhood and doesn't like the neighbors, there's no way to make them happy. Unless you just get rid of all these multiple or unrelated person dwellings. I really don't know what we're trying to accomplish here.
We're not even talking about unrelated person dwellings because,
Wasn't Corey talking about that earlier?
but isn't what's being proposed like dwellings that would only allow one unrelated?
No, we were talking about 4. Corey was talking about a
Aren't we
duplex that
still
would
on
have 2
item
unrelated
one?
on each side, which would be a total of 4, right?
Yes, you're correct. It'd be 2 per unit.
Right.
Whereas a rooming dwelling might have 4 people living within one unit together or more, typically more.
True, but yeah, but on one plot of land, if you had duplex with 2 unrelated each side, you have a total 4 unrelated on the plot. I can see Corey's point. I don't see how to solve it.
But I don't see how that's the same as a rooming dwelling that allows countless.
I didn't think we were
Unrelated people
talking
living
about rooming
together.
dwellings. We were talking about duplexes.
In all fairness, even if it is a owner occupied side, they could still have 2 unrelated people in there, and then the other side is going to have 2. So, I mean, whether it's owner occupied or not, it would still have possibly up to 4 unrelated.
Yeah, the concern that I've heard is just that if we go away from that, then developers who happen to have or tend to have a lot more money available to purchase buildings would just buy up a bunch and either split them into duplexes or add an additional building. So it wasn't really the concern about the parties specifically happening at those locations, and more that, you know, you're just gonna, because just like the old discussion under the old code, we were constantly talking about the area north of campus and how put all the students together and things are not, you know, it gets out of control. So they have that same concern if we're not requiring an owner to actually live there, because I guess the feeling is if the owner lives there, there's going to be a little more control and a little more care taken in the property. But if it's a landlord that owns it and they're not on the property, that can get out of hand more. Or
they're not even in the state.
Right. And it'll bring down the value of the property in the area and make it unpleasant to live in. And maybe those are all unfounded, but that's the fear.
And is that different than a single family house that's rented out and not occupied by an owner?
Maybe not, but for the rentals, I think the rentals that are single family homes that are intermixed, I don't think people would necessarily know that they're rentals when you walk around the city. But like when we talk about the area north of campus with the essentially student housing, you can tell when you go by there by the decor, the flags are in the windows instead of curtains, property isn't taken care of sometimes in front, it's never shoveled, those kind of things. So I think if they're single family home rentals and they fit into the neighborhood, that's fine. People don't really mind that. And there's over here in the Swan area, there are a lot of duplexes, and you walk down the street, you wouldn't know that some of those are rentals, or they could be both sides rentals because if they're grandfathered in. So I think it's more just the sense that you get a lot of activity in the neighborhood that just isn't conducive to families, I guess.
I guess if there's already duplexes, you know, we already know what typically happens with a duplex. I don't think the nature of who's living in a duplex is suddenly going to change. But, if
the landlord has to live in half of it, they're probably not going to want to buy it if they're not local.
Right, but from that perspective, if you own a duplex and it has to be owner occupied, you might have a takings argument because you can't sell it, you know?
No, and I don't think it's the best solution. But I think it's the one that I can't remember whether it's this commission that came up with that solution or whether the city commission came up with it. But
it's the city.
But I I'd love to come up with a better one, and I just cannot think of one that would address those concerns.
Well, I think I'm hearing that there's at least consensus interest in considering an alternative. And I'm hearing what some of the concerns would be that would need to be addressed. So let me, if everyone's comfortable, unless there's further discussion on item 1, let me give that some consideration. And I don't think this is probably ripe enough to jump from this conversation to ordinance introduction. So I might suggest bringing this back to work session next month for additional conversation if everyone's agreeable to that.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay. So would I be correct in what I'm hearing with regard to concerns about 2-family and accessory dwelling, that there's probably not an appetite at the moment for a broad allowance of any of the 4 housing types listed under 2A across those districts? Would that be accurate?
Yeah.
Would there be any interest? So jumping down to 2B, I ran through some scenarios. I don't know that this is an exhaustive list of scenarios, but just some potential opportunities where you might feel differently in terms of allowing going beyond 2-family or accessory dwellings within a residential area. B1 really is kind of an existing option, which is someone comes forward as a property owner and says, I'd like to rezone to CD4, which would allow for those uses. And the Planning Commission and City Commission can consider that rezoning application. B2 is really an option to say the Planning Commission establishes something on the zoning map that says within these areas of the CD3 and CD3L, we would consider some additional housing types, probably as a special use, but that these are areas where we'd be willing to consider it. B3 would be considering within a distance of some other area. So my thinking here was, perhaps within a certain district of or a certain distance of downtown, perhaps within a certain distance of Mission Street or the university, where there's likely to be more opportunity for pedestrian traffic, where businesses could benefit from additional residents living in proximity, where there might be some enhanced buffering of neighborhoods, just due to the, there are ups and downs to living in close proximity to those 3 areas of the community. And so it may be less attractive from a single family development perspective and more attractive from a multiple family development perspective. And then 4 and 5 are kind of flip sides of the same coin of looking at, if we have on, let's say on Lansing Street, north of High, if we had a rooming dwelling and it was licensed for 12, and that's a situation that does exist. If we had a situation like that, would the Planning Commission be willing to entertain converting that into a 3-unit building, 6 occupants instead of 12, and making it a legal conforming use, reducing the non-conformance, and in many of those cases, it's probably unrealistic to expect that the conversion from 12 head rooming unit to single family is going to happen in the near term. And this might be an option to accelerate a move towards a more compatible use on the property. And then as part 5, looking at if we had a vacant, blighted, or obsolete home. There's some examples in the community of homes that have been vacant pending renovation for a number of years that are large.
And down the block from Bill.
I'm not naming any specific properties, but just there are places, there are homes that are huge projects that would be financially complicated for the even better than average homeowner builder to take on as an owner occupied property. If there might be benefit to providing some alternative uses in those instances, to get a property redeveloped as opposed to a property remaining blighted. So that's a lot of different questions, and we can tackle those in any order. If there's something on this list that you say absolutely not, or something on this list that you say now that's something I'm interested in. We could kind of take it from there.
Incidentally, there is a couple in maybe right next door to a certain blighted property. But they bought the one next door for a song, and they were at a party. Oh, Lordy, when we had parties, they like to do this. They just buy these things, and I think they're both teachers, and then that's their avocation is fixing up old. No, the one next door is, oh my goodness, a large project, yeah. And I thought of that as really, I thought of that before you drew our attention to this. I said, well, as an incentive, it might be something.
And my thought with that was the planning commission could carve out a special use category that is very targeted and very specific and limited in scope. That's, for properties of a certain age, of a certain size, of a certain current condition, that haven't resulted in that condition due to neglect in the immediate lead up to the proposal, where it might facilitate that redevelopment. Because what I fear is in some of these instances, the alternative is likely to be a vacant lot at some point in the future. And I think a vacant lot providing no tax base, providing no neighbors, is probably worse than an alternative that might not be single family in nature.
Just to play devil's advocate with this scenario, so I want to have some more rental properties in town. I see this building is for sale. I know I don't really want to rent it out as a single family, so I buy it. I leave it vacant for a year or whatever we determine as the time. At which point I tear it down and I build a much larger triplex or something on it, so I can house more people there. Is there something we can put in there that would prevent something like that from happening?
Well, as I said, I was thinking along the lines of some of the other carve outs we've made in the district, like bed and breakfast, specify that the building should be of a certain age, so that there's not that opportunity to buy a house, bulldoze it, and build something from scratch as a bed and breakfast, for example. We could certainly address those concerns through special use permit criteria to ensure that the property would conform, and it would remain subject to the review of the planning commission to see if it does in fact conform with those conditions. And if the planning commission says, if you call their bluff and say, nope, you've created this circumstance and you don't actually meet this condition, that would be your grounds for denial of an application. It's just those type of properties are a challenge because, for instance, if the property was located, I'll use a specific property example. So if we imagine that the former Rowley Funeral Home property on South University, it's a large property, probably larger than most single family occupants would want. If we imagine that was zoned in one of our single family districts, CD3 or CD3L, and it's not, but let's imagine that it is, that would be an easy case to rezone to CD4 because of its proximity to other CD4 zone properties. The other scenarios we're talking about are probably more within a neighborhood where we'd be dealing with a spot zoning. And so rezoning really isn't an avenue to address those without a more wholesale rezoning of an entire district, which is probably not appropriate in those cases. So creating, even an overlay district can be a floating overlay. The city's used stationary overlay in the past with the mission redevelopment overlay, but you can have floating overlays that can be applied to just individual parcels that can add some specific rules, and those could be an opt-in condition. Go through a rezoning process, add the overlay, and then go through a special use permit process later. That's not as friendly to the developer, whoever that might be, if it's a homeowner or a more traditional developer, because it would add a lot of time and expense and uncertainty to the process, but it is an option. A more direct option would be to just permit it under certain circumstances and then everybody knows that they have to get through the planning commission process, but once they've done that, they've got security to move forward.
Well, I am kind of interested in the B4 option too. That sounds like some kind of a way to clear up a lot of the non-conforming ones too. But I don't know how other people would feel about it. And I haven't thought it all the way through to come up with scenarios that would complicate it.
Is there a way to maybe have like a because even if they do that property development, they still need to get like a renter's license, right? So would there be a possibility of looking at having for those areas that we really are looking to target, that it's a missing middle housing and our target population is really going to be young professionals and families, you know, so that it's a different type of rental license than could be used for student housing? Is there something that could be specified that way?
No, because it would be making a case for housing discrimination at that point. So we can regulate on the basis of the number of occupants, but not on the other protected class information about the occupants. So, no, I mean, unfortunately, when you're dealing with concerns about students and student behavior, it's challenging because of the nature of how housing is regulated, that you just simply can't. There are certain housing types that students are more likely to be interested in occupying, certainly, than other populations, just like families are probably more interested in certain types of housing than other types of housing, but it's just not possible to operate in that manner. One of the reasons why I have brought this up in the past, though, is because we have a significant amount of student housing in the city that is really designed and built for students only. I mean, the target market is students. It's marketed to students. It's really priced in a manner that's unaffordable to other household types. And these units, although they could potentially be appealing to students, they also capture a lot of these other target markets that we've talked about, like young professionals, just single people in general, older people. And we have our age distribution in the city is definitely inverted bell. I think I have that right. We got a lot of young people and we got a lot of older people, and we don't have a lot of people in the middle. I think we actually have a lot of people in the middle on this planning commission, and most of them, we're not very representative. I think most people in the city are 60 and up or 25 and under, and so they happen to have similar housing types they're attracted to, and so you do kind of roll the dice in a way. You can't really serve one at the exclusion of the other. But the other thing is, not every student. Students are half our population, and they deserve nice, safe, quiet places to live as well. And they may, I think there may be I think we sometimes make a mistake when we associate all students with the type of behavior we've seen in the past in certain instances in certain parts of the community. That's representative of a small fraction of people and a small fraction of instances. And so, while I don't think anybody would want that type of behavior in their neighborhood, we're unlikely to see that as a result of a triplex in a neighborhood that's not adjacent to campus necessarily. I don't think that's likely to be an outcome.
Well, we've kind of laid out the difficulties here.
So on this,
and good for us,
well, these aren't easy issues for sure.
I'll just say I'm not a fan of doing the B1 doing the rezoning. It just sounds like that might, I don't know, get out of control.
Yeah, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, really.
Agreed.
But I like B4 and B5 as ways to encourage getting middle housing built.
It's worth a thought.
Okay. Well, let me, similar to item 1, let me put together some broad concepts that might produce those results, and I will bring those forward next month in work session.
Are we still talking here?
Well, I'm at work and I'd like to go home.
Do we need a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Commissioner Daly,
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich,
Aye.
Commissioner Honig,
Aye.
Commissioner Irwin,
Hi.
Commissioner Kingsworthy,
Aye.
Commissioner Leash,
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman.
Hi.
Madam Chair, you are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
See you next month.
Bye.